The Adventures of Dusty Dingleman by Cat. Special thanks to Vanessa B., the OG Dusty Dingleman. Chapter 1. The Missing. I don't belong here. When are things going to get back to normal? Dusty let out a loud sigh. She was sitting on the bed in the Brooks' spare bedroom. Mrs. Brooks was Grammy Molly's best friend and neighbor. She made the best peanut butter cookies ever, and Dusty didn't even like peanut butter. Mr. Brooks had a mean look to him, like a movie villain, but he's a really nice man. He was always telling the silliest jokes, dad puns they call them. He would always greet Dusty with, "How's your hog?" He said this because of her bike, but it only made sense to Mr. Brooks. The Brooks were nice people, and Dusty liked them well enough, but she did not want to be here. Tonight was going to be the third night of her sleeping in this room. Dusty looked at the room. It was a nice room. Miss Brooks kept it really clean for when her kids would visit. She had 2 boys. Her boys were older than Dusty's mom and no longer boys, but moms were like that. The room had a big bed, way bigger than any Dusty ever had. It looked like a room for grown-ups. Brown wood furniture, dark, solid-colored bedding and curtains, with bare white walls. Mrs. Brooks told her that Uncle Joe was coming to get her tomorrow. And this made Dusty want to cry. She loved her Uncle Joe, her great-uncle, actually. Uncle Joe could fix anything, and he still liked little kid stuff, making him fun to be around. Only now, if Uncle Joe was coming for her, then they didn't find Grammy Molly. Dusty had been living with Grammy ever since her mom disappeared. Now Grammy is missing too, and it had been so hard worrying and wondering about her mother, but now Grammy Molly was gone, and that was scary. What happened to them, and where are they? Dusty believed in her heart that her mother and grandmother were still out there somewhere. "We got dinner on the table. Why don't you come down and eat with us?" Mr. Brooks said from the open doorway. Dusty jumped a little. She didn't know he was there. She slid off the bed and followed him downstairs. Time to pretend everything is okay. Dusty was getting tired of pretending. In the morning, Dusty packed up her things. All she brought along was a few changes of clothes which she had stuffed into her backpack. Miss Brooks had washed it all for her, so she took care to pack it carefully. She then went downstairs and sat in the living room to wait for Uncle Joe. When her uncle arrived, they all sat at the table eating peanut butter cookies. The adults drank coffee. Dusty had milk. They had good milk down here in the country. She never cared for the milk living in town. Dusty sat quietly, nibbling at her cookie as the adults talked. Uncle Joe said the police were looking for Molly, but the town had a small force. He said they weren't sure where she went, but they knew she was looking for Linda. Linda was Dusty's mother. Mrs. Brooks agreed that that's what Molly told her when she asked if she would look in on Dusty that day. All of the adults at the table kept stealing glances at Dusty. They kept talking and stopping, making uncomfortable conversation. "They don't want to say too much in front of me," Dusty knew. Everyone acted like she was a little kid, but I'm not, Dusty thought. I'm 14. Well, almost. I'll turn 15 in 2 months. Miss Brooks said she was sure Molly would turn up soon, and she would likely bring Linda back with her. The adults forced smiles and nodded agreement. Uncle Joe tossed back the last of his coffee and thanked the Brooks and said they had best be going. They all said their goodbyes and promised to keep the Brooks informed. Then Dusty joined her uncle in his SUV, and they drove a few miles down the road to Grammy Molly's farmhouse. "Listen, Dee, your dad is coming down for you next week. Till then, you're going to have to stay with me, okay? We'll need to pack up all your stuff," Uncle Joe said as they parked in front of the house. "But what about when Grammy and Mom come back?" Dusty pleaded. Suddenly this all felt bad. It felt like Grammy and Mom might not come back. "Your mom will see to that when she gets back here, Dee. You know that." Uncle Joe gave his crooked smile like he always did. Only this time, something was wrong. Something in his eyes made the smile seem sad. And Dusty felt herself tear up. She swallowed hard, trying to keep it together. Uncle Joe hugged her, and she began to sob. When she got herself under control and came away from his arm, she saw his eyes were red and shining with tears. On the drive back to town, Uncle Joe had Dusty go over everything she remembered again. He listened to her talk, letting her get through it all at her own pace. She started with her mother. The day her mother disappeared, all she could really report was the phone call. She had just set down her book bag at their apartment when the phone rang. It was odd because her mother would normally text her. That was how Dusty communicated best. She would only call if she was in a hurry. Her mother said that she was going to be late, that there had been reports of some sort of incident on the hiking trails. Dusty's mother works for the Park Service. After that call, Dusty's mom had not come home. The next day, Dusty called Grammy Molly. Grammy came down to stay with Dusty at the apartment and worked with the authorities to try and find her mom. Uncle Joe and Grammy Molly took care of Dusty and tried to keep things as normal as possible so she could finish the school year. When school let out a week later, she moved to Grammy's farmhouse in the country. 4 days ago, Grammy said she had to spend the day in town, and she told Dusty she was going to have Mrs. Brooks check in on her, but she never came back. Uncle Joe asked, "Do you remember anything about what she was doing in the days before she left? Did she say anything about where she was going or why?" Dusty shook her head. "No, she just said she had to go to town and take care of some business for my mom. I wanted to go, but she said no. And the days before that, she was going through Mom's stuff that she got back from the police. Something in there must have made her go." Uncle Joe nodded. "Yeah, that's what we all figured. I'm going to go through it all again." They got back to town and went to Uncle Joe's house. The house had been in the family since her great-grandparents bought it back in the olden days, like the 70s. There was a spot at the end of the wall that was covered with notches, each mark showing the height of someone. Uncle Joe and Grammy Molly had several marks, each with their name and age. There were even a few of Dusty's mom. Dusty had growth marks at Grammy's house, again with a few marks belonging to her mother. Dusty walked over and stood with her back against the wall, and used her hand to see where she matched up today. She turned to check to see she lined up perfectly with one of Grammy Molly's lines. That made her smile. Dusty walked over to one of the bedrooms, the one where she had slept before. As she reached for the doorknob, Uncle Joe called out, "You're going to be sleeping in my room. The next one down." She had already opened the door. "See, I got the stuff from your old place here in Molly's old room," Uncle Joe said as he walked up behind her. The room was filled with boxes and some of their furniture from the apartment. "See, you're in this room over here." He led her to another room. "This was your room?" Dusty asked, just to have something to say. She already knew it was his old room. "Yeah, when me and your grandma were kids, this was my bedroom. Now I sleep in the master, just like my daddy once did." Dusty walked into the room and set her things onto the bed. The room had a dusty smell, like someone had brushed all the dust off all the surfaces into the air. The comforter on the bed looked like it had been there a while, and the curtains on the windows were so sun-faded they looked white on one side. Uncle Joe was clearly not Mrs. Brooks when it came to house cleaning. "Dusty?" Uncle Joe asked. "Yeah, it is," she answered. Uncle Joe got a funny look on his face and said, "Oh, yeah, okay. Look, why don't we try this?" He walked over and opened the window. A light breeze began to blow into the room, and it helped. Dusty realized her uncle was calling her name and not commenting on the state of the bedroom. It made her feel guilty. "I'm sorry, I thought, hey, it's okay. It's kind of funny, really, when you think about it. Truth is, this room could use some work. I gave it a quick once over, but my old vacuum seems to stir up dust more than cleaning. Plus, I always call you D." Dusty smiled. That small splash of humor lightened the mood. Uncle Joe must have seen the change on her face, because now he sported his crooked smile. Maybe, Dusty thought, just maybe things are going to be all right. That night, after settling in, Uncle Joe took her to George's Pizza, which was her favorite place in town. She hadn't had their pizza since she moved in with Grammy Molly. Uncle Joe even let her get a coffee from Starbucks on the way home. Once there, they sat together and watched a movie. Uncle Joe was a real nostalgia nerd, forever in love with his old stuff from his days as a kid. He has a collection of old toys and action figures. There's boxes full of comic books and old video games and consoles. When it came to movies, Uncle Joe loved sci-fi. His house is old and it looks it, except for the den. That was Uncle Joe's theater. He has big, comfortable recliners with cup holders and places for you to set your snacks. There's a popcorn machine in the corner, next to a small refrigerator with a glass door full of pop. On the walls, on either side of the recliners, movie posters hung. All of them old movies. Terminator, Aliens, Star Wars, and such. Along the back wall, there were shelves full of movies. At the front, something had changed. Last time Dusty was here, Uncle Joe had a giant flat screen hanging on the wall, but now the wall was bare. "Ah, tonight you get to experience my new laser projector. It seems more genuine than watching a TV," Uncle Joe said, as he stared at the empty wall. "What do you want to watch? My machine can stream, so we can watch almost anything." Dusty knew her uncle would sit through a modern rom-com with her if she asked, even though he would never pick something like that. He was trying so hard to make her happy, she decided to choose something he would love. Dusty didn't feel she had the strength to take one of his shoot-'em-up space movies, so she went for something light and funny. She could see in his eyes that he agreed with her pick. "Well now, that deserves 4K Ultra HD, he said, retrieving the disc from the shelf. This, of course, was one of the movies that Uncle Joe owned several copies of. Next to the box on the shelf were 2 other Blu-ray versions and a DVD version. The streaming version is pretty good, but it's not even close to the real thing. The sound on this disc isn't even the best, but it's still so much better. You're in for a treat." She knew he would get far more joy from this than she would, and that was her way of thanking him. But as it turned out, she got lost in the experience as well. Sitting there with her uncle was better than going to the movies, and she really got into Back to the Future. The next day, Uncle Joe woke her as he was leaving for work. He left money on the kitchen counter and told her to call him if she needed anything. Dusty lay in bed a while longer, then got up and went to the kitchen. She ate cereal for breakfast. Uncle Joe had a lot of cereal. Sitting at the table, she noticed half of the space was taken up by a large box. Dusty knew this was one of the boxes Uncle Joe packed up and brought from Grammy's house. She walked over to the box and saw her mother's laptop inside. Seeing it brought back the memory of her grandmother the day before she disappeared. Grammy had told her the police could not break the code. They had returned the computer along with other items they had collected in their investigation. Dusty told her that she knew the code because her mother would always let her use the computer for her schoolwork. Grammy wrote the code down, but that was it. If Grammy checked the computer, she did it sometime later because she never saw her grandmother with it. Dusty plucked the laptop out of the box and powered it up. When prompted, she entered the passcode and watched the screen change. What she saw was a map with a location pin. She stared at the map. I think that's Laid-Back Falls, she thought. Dusty clicked on the layers icon and switched to the satellite view. Sure enough, it was their picnic spot. Is that where Mom went? She wondered. Maybe Uncle Joe will want to go check when he got home from work. Mom always said he used to take her there when she was a kid, so he knows about it. Would he want to go? He might be tired from work. It might be dark by the time they got out there. She thought back. After I gave Grandma the code, when did she go? Was it the next day? Dusty was sure it was. She was sure Grammy Molly used the code and saw what she just did. She had to have known it was the falls and decided to go check the next day. Then she never came back. Mom said she had to go check out an incident reported on the trails. She must have used the computer to see where to go. She put a pin on the falls, so she must have gone there. Then she never came back. Grammy made me stay behind while she went to look for Mom. Uncle Joe will probably do the same. What if he never comes back? They brought her bike back with the stuff they took from Grammy's house. She could ride that out to the falls. What if she didn't come back? It didn't matter. She had to know. If her Grammy and her Mom were at the falls, she had to go. Anyway, if she told Uncle Joe, he would go out and leave her to wait. If he didn't come back, she'd be in the same state she was in now. She would still have to go out there, only she would get her uncle lost as well. Dusty got up and began to pace back and forth. What are you going to do, girl? Can you really wait here all day? Can you really stay behind if Uncle Joe decides to go without you? What are you going to do, girl? Dusty slowed her bike as she entered the trail. The path was wide and paved, made to accommodate bikers, hikers, and joggers. The trail was empty here, but that didn't mean she wouldn't run into people as she traveled ahead. The sort that used the trail on foot, the walkers and joggers, didn't care much for the mountain bikers, but all of them looked at her e-bike with disdain. Many didn't feel her mode of travel was appropriate on the trails meant for recreational exercise. Her mother always told her to pay it no mind. Your bike is allowed, so they can't complain. After traveling a bit, she slowed to look for the trees. She remembered the path to the falls was just ahead between two trees. Dusty stopped. This looked like the right place, but the last time she was here, the path was better defined. It had been a long time, though, because Dad was with us on our last picnic, she remembered. She turned between the two trees as she left the paved trail and turned into the dirt. She let off the throttle and pumped the pedals to pass through the overgrowth. The path was rough, but it was there. She had thoughts of dismounting and walking the bike along the bumpy parts, but she was in a hurry. She felt her destination calling for her. In her heart, she yearned to see her family once again. She had the sense that they were ahead somewhere. She knew it. When she was able to hear the falls, her spirit began to soar. She was close. They were close. She pedaled harder. She could see the wall of rock as the sound of the falls got louder. Finally, the trees and brush ended, and the path ahead was flat and grassy. Dusty biked along the stream that led to the falls, then stopped and laid her bike down in a quick, fluid motion. She walked along the water's edge against the rock wall. It was here where you had to walk along the wall to a path that curved. It led to a cave-like opening that took you behind the falling water. You had to know it was there because the falling water hid the small pocket of space behind the falls. This was a special place. Her mother would talk all the time how she would come with the family as a little girl. Dusty remembered this place for the happy times when she came with Mom and Dad when she was little. She hurried ahead. When she was able to see the entrance behind the water, she was surprised to see light. Why was there light? It was never dark in there as she remembered it, but they always visited during the day, and the sunlight would pour into the little room-like area with dull, dreamy light as it shined through the water. At least that's how she always remembered it, but ahead of her now there was light. Real light. Bright, and just like that, Dusty was gone.